right. This video is on barrel break-in. And the context, if you've been watching this video series, is obviously extreme long-range precision shooting for real-world applications. We're not focusing as much on Benchrest shooting as we are more practical long-range hunting or military applications where you're going to be deploying this rifle in a diversity of field conditions that are going to be varying constantly. So we're going to try to minimize a lot of our point of impact shifts due to varying bore conditions. So if you missed some of the videos before this one, like I said before, you definitely want to go back and check those out so you are on the same page that we are. Okay, this video I'm going to talk about two different break-in procedures. A lot of people are very curious about the standard Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in procedure, and there's a lot of different variations of this, but I'm going to show you kind of a typical way that barrel break-in is looked at. The full break-in procedure, I'll discuss that. I'll show you the situations in which that particular break-in procedure may be the most advantageous for you. The other break-in procedure we're going to talk about is the copper equilibrium break-in procedure. And this is the one that I've been hinting at for the last few videos. I may suggest this for a lot of you guys, and you'll see when we go through both of these. I'll define all our parameters. It depends on what exactly you're going to be doing with your rifle for which one of these different break-in procedures you're going to want to do. There's a lot of guys that kind of argue about this, and if you read the threads, you'll see a diversity of opinions when it comes to barrel break-in. And it's interesting because a lot of these discussions occur and people don't really define exactly what their mission criteria is. And so it's kind of like arguing about what kind of tires you want to put on your vehicle without defining exactly what you're going to be doing with it. I mean, do you need winter tires for your car? Do you need mud bogging tires for your truck? What are you going to be doing with this vehicle anyways? What you're doing with the vehicle is going to define what kind of tires you're going to put on it, right? Same is true with barrel break-in or anything else that we're talking about when we're visiting about equipment selection and equipment maintenance. What exactly do you intend to do with it? So we'll make sure we define all these things as we go through. So I want to say right off that as we're going through these different procedures, you got to keep in mind that each one of these different procedures is going to be more effective for one particular criteria set. So it's not that if we go through one procedure and I'm telling you the advantages of it, I'm not trying to shoot down the other way of doing it. I'm just saying that there's, a lot of different things we can be attempting to accomplish here. So keep that in mind. And also keep that in mind when you're reading through the blogs as well. A lot of these guys who are really big proponents of the Benchrest Shooter style barrel break-in procedure are obviously probably Benchrest shooters. So that particular procedure is going to be very effective for what they're trying to accomplish. And the procedure I'm going to show you is going to be more effective for trying to maintain copper equilibrium. And we kind of defined what we're talking about in the last few videos with that. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go back and watch those. So what's the point of barrel break-in anyways? We're talking about this is what you do for the first rounds. You got a virgin barrel that's never been had a round put through it. And you go through a certain break-in procedure that's supposed to, break-in procedures are commonly reported to reduce a barrel's propensity to foul, and basically it'll reduce your need to clean frequently, and it'll supposedly increase the life of your barrel. So that's the idea behind barrel break-in. When you get a brand new virgin bore that's from the factory, the rifling was cut out of there. And there's going to be little tiny jagged edges and things like that and imperfections. Sometimes there's microscopic chatter marks in there from the tooling or whatever. And your bore isn't completely smooth in all cases. Some rifle bores are going to be different than others. But the idea of a break-in is that you minimize some of the problems that can arise. If you're just to start putting rounds through a brand new rifle and firing them, without doing a break-in procedure, what can happen is sometimes the little pieces of steel, microscopic pieces of the jagged edges of the rifling, the lands, can break off in there and they can become embedded, and that can cause like microscopic gouging sometimes, or you can have little pieces tear off on a microscopic level during the break-in procedure, and that can that can reduce your bore consistency. And also, another point of the barrel break-in is particularly for mass-produced barrels that weren't lapped very well, is this will smooth out your rifle bore to where coppering and powder fouling won't have as much of a grip inside the bore, and so it'll stay cleaner longer. So let's get to it here, and let's discuss these two different systems and what we're trying to accomplish. The first one I'm going to talk about is the standard Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in procedure. This is probably the procedure that you're going to hear most talked about if you're reading gun magazines or even like tactical rifle shooting magazines or online. A lot of these, this is what most of the guys talk about. The shoot one, clean one for the first 10 or 30 rounds, depending on which method you're going through. They use JB compounds sometimes. And then this like shoot 5 clean once for the next 30 rounds or whatever. So that's the full Benchrest Shooter's break-in procedure. Now you got to keep in mind that this particular procedure I'm about to go over is most effective in a rifle that you're going to intend to have a very aggressive cleaning regime, where you're going to clean the rifle very thoroughly after each shot cycle or field usage. In an aggressive cleaning regime, full copper equilibrium is rarely attained, so break-in procedures kind of help to flatten out that coppering build curve that we've been showing you before. Remember how the copper kind of builds up if you have from shot 0 and then shot 1 you start to deposit some copper. The next shot you deposit more, and you constantly build up copper. So if you break in your bore using this procedure, it polishes it somewhat, and it flattens out that coppering build curve, so it takes longer for copper to build up in your bore. And this minimizes the bore condition variation for that period of time immediately after you've done a full aggressive cleaning in which all the copper was removed. So this would be most applicable to Benchrest shooters who they have a very aggressive cleaning regime. They're going to clean probably after each match or after each shot cycle. A lot of these guys, they'll shoot 20 or 40 rounds or whatever, and they'll go ahead and clean the rifle completely out. They'll get it back down to the bare metal. They'll get all the copper out of there. Also, military operators that are on a strict cleaning regime. Most of your military units have basically a set way that they're going to want you to clean your weapon system. So if you're in a military unit and you're on a very strict cleaning regimen, then this break-in is going to be advantageous, especially if you're having a hard time convincing your company commander why you want to maintain copper equilibrium. They might not understand that, so you might have no choice. And you're going to be on a very, very strict cleaning regimen. You're going to have to get all that copper out, just, following orders kind of deal. So in that case, this can be very, very helpful for that as well, because this will minimize your point of impact shift during that first part of you're always going to go back out into the field with a completely clean bore. If that's the situation, you're going to want to have a rifle that's effective sooner. So having that coppering build curve kind of flattened out especially during that first part, might be helpful in your situation. Also, this will be advantageous to shooters that are operating in extremely wet or other like highly corrosive environments. If you're operating in saltwater type conditions on the coast, if you're on a ship or something like that a lot, and this rifle's in a corrosive environment, and you have to have an extremely aggressive cleaning regime in which you completely remove everything from the bore and then store it with an oil coating every time you put it on the rack, then this Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in procedure will be helpful. So if you're forced onto a very aggressive cleaning regime, then this particular break-in procedure, the full break-in, may be slightly advantageous because it will flatten out that initial copper build curve, which will still get you pretty good results even after an aggressive copper cleaning. You're going to have the most dramatic improvements on this system are going to be seen when you're using like mass-produced factory rifle bores, where you're going to have some slightly rough or jagged edges in the rifling and it hasn't been completely lapped, this full break-in procedure can help to smooth some of that out. So if you got kind of a rough rifle bore to start with, this will you're going to see the most dramatic improvements on that. Obviously, you're going to see the least dramatic results using this cleaning or this break-in procedure if you're starting off with a match grade barrel, for example, that's already very, very highly polished and has been lapped properly from the manufacturer. Then you might not see hardly any noticeable results at all in some cases. So this full break-in procedure might not be worth it if you've got like a really good quality rifle barrel. For example, any of the well-known good quality aftermarket rifle barrels that guys used to do custom builds, like Hart or Lilja, Krieger, any of those Brucks, any of those like well-known brand name rifle barrels, the lapped ones that are done very well. This break-in procedure is not really going to help you a whole lot. So this is most helpful for standard factory rifle barrels. That's where you're going to actually see a pretty good improvement. There are some drawbacks to this system that we're about to go over. And the main drawback to this is that it's going to take quite a bit longer for you to attain your full copper equilibrium with this system after each time you clean it, because your copper is going to have a harder time sticking inside your bore. And like we talked about before on the videos earlier, a copper equilibrium is your friend. That's going to mean that you're going to have very consistent bore conditions after a certain point. Once you have a certain amount of copper in there, you're going to be pushing out as much as you add, and your bore conditions will stabilize. And that's the zone you want to be in. So if it's taking you longer to get to your copper equilibrium point, that is a slight disadvantage. Another drawback to this is while you're doing this, you're actually going to be introducing some abrasives to the bore, which are going to accelerate the mechanical erosion process. Most proponents of this particular break-in procedure recommend using JB during one of the steps, and we'll go over that in a second. But that's a 1200 grit like lapping compound. So it is an abrasive that is going to remove steel. So you're going to start to round off the edges on those lands in your rifling prematurely. So it's going to accelerate mechanical erosion before you even really start shooting a lot. Another drawback is increased likelihood of damage that can occur during this process due to the huge amount that you're going to be running your brush down the bore. This process, you're going to have 36 cleaning cycles. And that's going to be a lot of opportunities to do something wrong or make a mistake or ding something that you didn't want to ding. So you're going to have to be very, very careful if you so choose to use this Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in procedure. Okay, so now let's go over the procedure. And this is the procedure I got straight out of the 50 caliber manual hard target interdiction course. And this is a conglomeration of if you talk to a lot of different barrel manufacturers who do recommend this full break-in procedure. Now, a lot of barrel manufacturers do not recommend doing this barrel break-in procedure. But out of the ones that do, and out of all the different Benchrest shooters that are proponents of this is kind of the average, procedure to kind of balanced out. So this is very typical. There's slight variations of this. Maybe there's a few less shots or a few more shots for different parts of this, but this is basically how it goes. So I'm going to do this. It's 11 different steps that are going to be repeated. Okay? So this is the procedure for Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in. And like we said before, I just want to reiterate, this is intended for rifles that are going to be on an extremely aggressive cleaning regime, because this is going to reduce the ability of copper to deposit in the barrel. It's going to really slow that down. So copper equilibrium is going to be harder to attain with this system. So this is assuming you're going to have to, for reasons of a corrosive environment, be cleaning your rifle bore a lot. Okay? So if you're a Benchrest shooter and you're cleaning your rifle bore a lot, or if you're a military operator and your captain's yelling at you all the time to clean your rifle bore, then this particular break-in procedure may be advantageous in your situation. So let's go through it. Okay, now I should probably say that a lot of you guys, I did talk about bore snakes earlier. We're not going to be using a bore snake for this procedure at all. The break-in procedure, for the Benchrest shooting break-in procedure is because we're going to be using abrasives. And once you get a bunch of abrasives in your bore snake, they're going to soak in there. It's going to be real hard to get them out. And you don't want JB compound like permanently in your bore snake. I mean, you can wash it out, but I would not recommend using that. You're going to use a standard rod and brush and jag, okay? So the first step to this procedure, and this is for a brand new rifle barrel. If there's been rounds fired through this barrel already, then this break-in procedure is not going to help you. So this is for a virgin barrel, brand new, right out of the box, okay? So before you fire the first round, you're going to want to clean your bore and chamber thoroughly. That's the first step. Go ahead and use your brush, and you do want to use some solvents, as there may be some oil-based, lubricants in the bore either from the tooling, from when they cut the rifling, or when they stored it for transit. Sometimes they put some like grease or thick oil in there. So you're going to want to make sure that before you take your first shot, it's totally clean. So go ahead and clean it like normal. You use regular powder solvents on a brush, run a patch through there until it's nice and clean before your first shot. Also, you'll get out any little metal shavings or dust. I mean, if you have any grit in there at all when you're taking your first shot, when the rifle was in transit, or you don't know what's in that bore. You just want it to be clean before you take your first shot. Second step number 2 is go ahead and you can use any kind of ammunition. I wouldn't recommend using real expensive stuff. That's going to be kind of a waste. Just cheap ammo, whatever you got laying around is fine. Copper jacketed bullet. Take your first shot. Go ahead and fire 1 round. After you fire your first shot, you move on to step 3. You're going to clean with a powder solvent. Now, it's recommended here by a lot of guys to use Shooter's Choice. And that's a particular powder solvent that is designed for break-in procedure. It's supposed to condition the bore for the break-in process. So that's one that a guy would recommend. If you're going to be doing this break-in procedure, you're going to be doing a lot of work anyways. You might as well use what most guys recommend. So Shooter's Choice is what they recommend to use. And you're going to do about 10 strokes. So you're going to wet your brush, the actual brush. Now, don't worry about the copper getting on the brush, because you know how solvents can dissolve that a little bit. It's not going to be a problem here. Just go ahead and wet your brush with this. Do 10 strokes. After those 10 strokes, you're going to go ahead and dry the bore with some patches. It might take 3 or 4 patches, but get some patches in there. Make sure it's nice and clean again. Then the next step is to use an aggressive copper solvent like Sweet 762. And you're just going to take a couple drops, and you're just going to do 1 stroke of that. And this is how this procedure goes, okay? And you're going to want to wait for a couple of minutes. Wait 2 or 3 minutes. That's step number 6. And you want that stuff to soak in so you can get the copper out. You're going to want to make sure you have all your copper out, because the next step is going to involve an abrasive. And you don't want to introduce differential erosion due to copper deposition unevenly in the bore. Once you put on the abrasive compound, the JB, and you run it through, if you got a little bit of copper in one spot and not any copper in the other spot after this first shot, you're going to start to cause a wave pattern in there. So it's very, very imperative that you make sure you get all the copper out after the first shot. Okay, then after that, after you use the Sweet 762, you let it soak in for a while. You're going to run a patch through slightly wetted with WD-40, and that's going to chase out the sweets. You're going to try to get that out. Then you're going to run through some patches until your bore is completely clean and dry again, okay? So run through a couple, 2 or 3 patches. The next step, this is where it gets a little scary. You want to be extremely careful if you're doing this break-in procedure. I would never, ever recommend using JB bore compound or any kind of abrasive for our long-range purposes. But when you're doing this particular break-in procedure, if this is something you need to do, then this is the one case where this will be applicable here. And you're going to wrap a patch around a jag that's smeared with some JB bore cleaning compound. That's a 1200 grit lapping compound. It is abrasive. It will remove steel. And if all your copper's been removed and you do 10 strokes very carefully, now you're not going to want to allow the patch to exit the muzzle, okay? If the patch with the JBs on it exits the muzzle and then you pull it back through again, through that crown, that abrasive compound is going to basically erode your crown, and that's going to be counterproductive. So do not allow the patch to go past the muzzle. Okay, don't let it exit the crown. And you're going to want to do 10 strokes very carefully, very evenly. Don't go too fast. Go at a nice even pace. You want it to turn with the rifling, okay? So after your 10 strokes, you're going to push it all the way through, and you're going to exit the muzzle out the end, and then you're going to remove the patch. You're not going to pull it through the crown on your way back in with that JB on there. That's going to be a bad deal. So when you're completely done, get that brush pushed all, or put that jag all the way through, and get that patch off of there. Then you're going to remove the rod, and you're going to get a new patch, and you're going to wet that with just a little bit of WD-40 again, and you're going to go ahead and put that through the bore, and you're going to run that through a few times, 3 or 4 times, and you're going to get out all of the JB compound and the metal grindings, okay? I know, it's a little scary. JB is going to remove metal. It's going to look kind of gray. It's going to be black or gray colored, metallic, and you're going to want to get all of that stuff out of there. The JB compound and the metal grindings that it basically removed. So before you fire your next shot, that's super important. If you start firing shots with grit in there, that's going to be counterproductive as well. So after you've got that patch that was wetted with WD-40 and you don't see any kind of trace of any kind of gray or black color or metal, then you're going to run through a few dry patches until your bore is perfectly clean and dry. So that's the 11 steps, and I'll have them listed here for you. And I'll put these in the description as well. I'll just post these steps in there for you guys so you can just print it off, because that's a lot of stuff. Don't want to screw it up or miss something. Okay, now you're going to do this for each shot, okay? This is how the procedure works. So after each shot for the first 30 rounds, it's a lot of work. You're going to want to be careful. Now, one of your temptations, if you're doing this break-in procedure, is you're going to get impatient. And if you start getting impatient, you're going to have to step away from the rifle and take a break. Because if you get sloppy on this, you're going to wreck something. You're using abrasives. So you want to be very, 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 very careful not to get in a hurry, not to get in a rush, not to get frustrated. You screw something up while you're doing your break-in, you're going to have a bore that's much more worse off than it would have been if you just would have left it alone. And when you're talking about this abrasive compound, you want to be, it only takes 1 or 2 mistakes, and there you go, you wrecked it. So you want to be very careful. So you're going to want to repeat this process for every shot for the first 30 rounds, okay? After that, you're going to repeat the same process. You're going to you're going to shoot 5 and then clean 1. So every 5 rounds after that. Now, if you're at the range and you're shooting, it's go ahead to try to, maybe put it on paper. You got your scope mounted on there or whatever. If you're doing it that way, it's fine to shoot, but don't expect to get any kind of grouping at all while you're doing this, because obviously each time you do your cleaning cycle, you're completely changing the dimensions of the bore. You're grinding away material, so you're not going to get any kind of grouping at all while you're doing your break-in procedure. So just be aware of that. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, this Benchrest Shooter's break-in procedure that we just covered, like I said, you want to be very, very, very careful that you're doing this if you decide to do it. Now, here are my personal recommendations, okay? Only use this procedure that I just described if you really, really, really need to employ an aggressive cleaning regime due to particularly corrosive environments, or if there's indications possibly in your particular rifle bore that it needs to have it done. So only do this if you're going to have a very aggressive cleaning regime in which you're going to have to be forced to clean that copper out after each time you set the rifle on the rack. If you're doing that, then this procedure might be helpful, okay? And the other recommendation I have, like I said before, is be very, very, very careful if you do this, okay? Okay, so let's move on to the next procedure here. And this is the one that I would recommend to most of you. Like I said, unless you're in an extremely corrosive environment or someone's making you completely strip her down to the metal each time you shoot or something like that, you're going to want to maintain copper equilibrium as best you can, like we talked about in our earlier videos. So you're going to want to use the following procedure, this next one I'm about to tell you. And this is for normal environmental conditions, where you don't have extremely corrosive environments like saltwater spray or something like that. And this system is going to enable the bullet to polish the bore during the initial break-in process, rather than the JB compound doing that. It's true that the copper is not as hard as steel, obviously, but there are going to be mild abrasives in the gunpowder, and like we talked about on the thermal, mechanical, and chemical erosion videos, you are going to have erosion. So the bullet is going to do this for you in this process. It's going to be done naturally. We're going to avoid using any abrasives that we're going to add to the bore besides what's already naturally in the gunpowder. So this process minimizes the mechanical erosion of the bore and is going to be most effective for rifles that are intended to be deployed in a state of full copper equilibrium, like we talked about before, where we've reached that flat spot, where you're in that stable zone, where your point of impact is going to not have the shift due to changing bore conditions because your copper is slowly continuing to build up constantly. So in this one, we're shooting for full copper equilibrium. Now, this procedure only requires the removal of the copper fouling as needed. So if you anticipate you're going to put the rifle down in the rack for quite a while, you're a little bit worried about moisture being absorbed by the carbon fouling, which could cause corrosion, you're just going to go through and clean the rifle just for carbon fouling. You're not going to aggressively attack the copper in this case. So that's what this cleaning or this break-in procedure is designed for, okay? Now, this may not be as appropriate for rifles deployed in extremely corrosive environments, but for all other purposes, this may be the way to go. Okay, so there's some benefits to this system I'm about to go through, and the primary benefit is for extreme long-range operators, which demand minimal changes to the bore conditions from shot cycle to shot cycle. In the standard Benchrest break-in procedure, we showed you how that copper equilibrium build curve is flattened out. So what happens is, although the changes are less dramatic from shot to shot, it's stretched out for a longer period of time. And because your copper is constantly building, even though it's building less from shot to shot, with the full break-in procedure, you still are building that copper, and it's going to change your pressure dynamics slowly. So instead of having all your change done at once and you get it over with and then you're in equilibrium, the full break-in procedure kind of drags it out over a long period of time, trying to kind of minimize it. So there will be, and this is only going to be noticed at extreme long range, but the variations in pressure due to that slow build is going to change muzzle velocity particularly, and that's going to be problematic for trying to really have a reliable firing solution figured out and having a real good idea of your muzzle velocity variations plotted out over a different period of time. So this particular system I'm about to go over is geared for getting you into a state of copper equilibrium quickly so that you can have minimal changes to bore conditions after you've reached that equilibrium state. So the full copper equilibrium is reached more quickly after a full cleaning in this break-in procedure that I'm about to show you. Obviously, another benefit would be reduced mechanical erosion during the break-in cycle. You're not going to be introducing any kind of abrasives, and you're going to minimize your risk of damage because there's a lot less cleaning cycles during this break-in procedure. You're going to basically have a total of 10 cleaning cycles as opposed to 36 during this break-in procedure. So you're going to have less probability of dinging something or getting impatient during this process or neglecting to do something correctly. Now, this copper equilibrium break-in procedure we're about to go over is going to be most effective when you're using good quality barrels. Like if you have a custom rifle or a nice target rifle or a varmint rifle that's well known for having a pretty decent barrel, it's been correctly lapped from the factory, this is going to work very well. You're not going to have a need to really go through and do your own lapping as you would basically be doing in the full break-in procedure. So it works best for a pretty good rifle barrel. And the main drawback to this one is really kind of what we discussed a little bit before, that your copper deposition is going to be more rapid from shot to shot during that initial phase Immediately after cleaning, if you do a full cleaning where you removed all the copper, that initial phase is going to have more rapid copper deposition, and up until you've reached copper equilibrium. So that during that initial phase, you're going to have a little bit more point of impact shift and variations in your pressure curve due to the buildup of the copper more rapidly. So it's going to be more noticeable. It's going to be more compacted into a shorter period of time. So whereas the other one was kind of designed to spread out the copper deposition phase over a long period of time, which would result in less variation from shot to shot, although it would be stretched out for a longer time. So it's kind of important that whichever of these break-in procedures that you choose to do, that you understand the cleaning regime that is going to be the most effective with these two different break-in procedures. You're going to want to match the break-in to the cleaning regime you anticipate in using. That's going to be kind of what determines which break-in procedure you're going to use. So let's go through the copper equilibrium break-in procedure. Now, if you're doing this break-in procedure, a bore snake is going to work okay. That's going to be fine. We're not going to be using any abrasives for this. So if you have a bore snake, you don't have to worry about that. That'll work just fine. Step number 1 is the same as it was for the other procedure. Before firing the rifle for the first time, you're going to want to thoroughly clean your bore and chamber. So you're going to want to use solvents, like I said before. You're going to want to completely get that cleaned out, and then you're going to want it nice and dry. So you're going to want to make sure that it's all nice and clean. Then you're going to go ahead and you're going to fire your first shot. And then the third step is going to be you're going to clean with a mild powder solvent, and you're going to do 10 strokes. You're going to go ahead and dip a brush in your mild powder solvent, and you're going to go ahead and do 10 strokes. And you're going to want to be careful, like I said before. And after that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to dry your bore with patches until clean. Usually it takes 3 or 4 patches, and you'll get her nice and clean. That's pretty much simple. We're only removing the powder falling and the metal that has been loosened. If there's been any jagged edges on any of the rifling or any the machining or anything left in there that you didn't get out that was knocked loose during that first shot, you're going to remove that with this cleaning. That's the purpose of this cleaning. So the first bullet is going to get those rough edges kind of knocked out, and you're simply going to make sure they're removed before you fire your next round. So this 4-step cleaning cycle that we just did, you're going to repeat that process for each shot just for the first 5 rounds. That'll be plenty. After 5 rounds, most of your machining and stuff like that, your little jagged edges are going to be completely removed after 5 shots. In reality, unless you got something really goofy going on inside there, for a typical rifle barrel, this 5 shots is more than enough. So shoot 1, clean 1 for the first 5 rounds. After that, you're going to go ahead and shoot 5 and then clean for the next 25 rounds. So 5 more cleaning cycles total after that. Go ahead and do 5 shots at a time, and then go ahead and clean it like we said here. And you're just going to use the standard powder solvent. You're not going to have to worry about removing the copper because we're not going to be attacking it with an abrasive. The reason for the other break-in procedure that they had to remove the copper so aggressively is because when you introduce that JB abrasive, that lapping compound, you don't want differential mechanical erosion being introduced to the bore. That's going to be bad. So this, you don't have to worry about that. So this is basically a much shorter process. You only have 10 cleaning cycles. The total number of rounds fired is the same as the other one, 60 rounds total, and that'll be more than enough for a break-in process. So the point of this particular break-in process, the equilibrium break-in, was that we're just trying to minimize any kind of damage that could happen due to some of those tiny little jagged pieces of metal left over from machining, causing damage to your bore after being removed from the first few shots. So we're just making sure we get her cleaned out between the first few shots until all those things have been polished by the rifle bullet. And then after that, it's safe to go, and you should be good to go. Let's do a summary here, just comparing the two one last time so that we know exactly what we're looking at. Let's simplify things here and just look at the highlights. So we have the 2 different systems, the Benchrest Shooter's barrel break-in procedure and the copper equilibrium break-in procedure. Okay? The first one, the Benchrest Shooter's break-in, you have a total of 60 rounds fired, and you have 36 different cleaning cycles, okay? You're going to shoot one, clean once for the first 30 rounds, and then you're going to move to a shoot 5, clean once for the next 30 rounds. And that's going to add up to a total of 36 cleaning cycles. And like we said before, the full-bore Benchrest Shooter's break-in procedure is going to be most effective for rifles that are going to be on aggressive cleaning regimes. So for those guys who have to completely remove all the copper from the barrel every time they set it on the rack, they're not going to want to have to go through the entire process of building up that copper equilibrium state every time, because that can take, about 40, 50, 60 rounds sometimes to reach full copper equilibrium. So they're going to want to reduce that initial phase of copper build and flatten out that line, so you're building copper the whole time you're shooting, and it is slightly changing your pressure dynamics from round to round, but it minimizes it. So this is intended for rifles that are going to be shot during that initial phase repeatedly over and over and over again. So for Benchrest shooters, military operators that have to go on an aggressive cleaning regime, that might be the one to use. The second one, a copper equilibrium break-in procedure, is more custom tailored for extreme long-range precision shooter who plans on taking advantage of the copper equilibrium phase of the bore. And that one consists of 60 rounds as well. You only have 10 total cleaning cycles. You're basically shooting 1 and cleaning 1 for the first 5 rounds, and then shooting 5 and cleaning once for the next 25 rounds. So this particular break-in procedure is going to be the most effective for rifles that are on a minimal disturbance cleaning regime where the copper equilibrium is maintained. And that's going to be very, very helpful for extreme long-range precision shooting on small targets particularly. You're going to want that copper equilibrium state if you can afford to do so. So basically, you're going to have to pick one of these break-in procedures based on what criteria your shooting discipline demands. And for Benchrest shooters, the Benchrest Shooter's break-in barrel procedure is obviously probably the best choice. For our purposes, we're talking about deploying this weapon system in the field. You're going to want to have that thing ready to rock and roll when you take it off the shelf immediately, and you're going to be able to calculate a firing solution with confidence because you know exactly what your internal bore conditions are at that moment, and you can know that your firing solutions and all your zeros have been confirmed at the different ranges for full copper equilibrium. And so you're going to have the least amount of barrel change when you maintain your rifle with copper equilibrium in mind. So probably a final word here on different types of products that you can select, particularly these different solvents. Now for the full break-in procedure, like I talked about with the Benchrest shooters, I did give you they prefer using Shooter's Choice, the Sweet 762, a little bit of WD-40 and JB bore compound for that particular bore break-in procedure. For the other bore break-in procedure, for the copper equilibrium one, obviously you're not going to want to use a solvent that is designed to aggressively attack copper. Now, it's true that a lot of solvents today are kind of like do-it-all solvents, and they do advertise that they remove metal fouling. A lot of times you're talking about lead fouling. That's going to be okay. Even if it's a mild copper solvent, that's going to be fine. You just don't want something that's super aggressive. You definitely don't want to use abrasives for the second break-in procedure, the equilibrium one. You're just going, basically, if you can find a solvent that is primarily designed to remove carbon fouling, then that's going to be what you're looking for. So like the outers, the hops number 9, any of those are going to work just fine. Okay, one final word here on our break-in procedure, and that's a lot of you guys might be kind of worried because possibly maybe you didn't do any break-in procedure and you just went ahead and started shooting your rifle. I wouldn't worry too much about that. This is really splitting hairs. This is going to help you, but if you missed it because you didn't know about this earlier, it's not going to like destroy your bore or anything like that. You might notice a small difference in how quickly your copper deposits in the bore. But like I said earlier, this copper equilibrium break-in procedure is designed to get you up to your equilibrium point quickly. So if you missed out on this break-in procedure and you already got your rifle with some rounds through it, don't worry too much. It's still going to work pretty good. I've got a lot of rifles that I didn't do any kind of break-in procedure on, and those things shoot awesome, even out to 1,100 meters. And I've been able to still plot my muzzle velocity variation curve without a problem. I still am able to maintain my copper equilibrium without a problem. So it's not something you need to get all worked up about if you did miss it. But for a lot of you guys who are really, 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 really into this whole deal, there was a lot of questions on break-in procedures, so I figured I'd give you the best rundown of it that I could. So if you did miss it, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. Your rifle's still going to shoot probably great. A lot of this stuff, like I said, is splitting hairs to the point to where it's almost unmeasurable, the difference that you'd see using one procedure compared to the next. Especially if you're talking about a decent quality rifle barrel, you're not going to notice a whole lot of difference from a barrel that had absolutely no break-in procedure to one that did. For most high-quality barrels, it's going to be very, very hard to tell that difference. If some barrels might need it worse than others, in those you might have noticed a difference, but it's not gonna kill you. So just wanted to give you that for you guys who might have missed out on this whole break-in procedure deal, and just went ahead and started shooting, because I've done that on lots of rifles too. And you'd be surprised, like a lot of guys really, really push the break-in, and it can make a difference, but it's a very, very, very small difference when compared against all the other things that you're going to have to pay a lot more attention to. Your ability to properly dial in a firing solution for compensating for all those different conditions we're going to be talking about, that's what all your shooting skills are going to basically rest on. Something like a break-in process is not going to give you that much of a leg up. It can help you, but missing out on it is not going to handicap you in any significant way. So just wanted to get that out there as well. For as much time and energy has been expended on this topic and so many of the forums and the different articles written on it, I mean, that's cool. And, there's nothing wrong with making sure that everything's done properly. But they could have spent a lot more time and energy worrying about things that maybe would have affected the rifle a lot more than this. So in the grand scheme of things, this is kind of small potatoes for a lot of the other things. You probably do want to clean your bore before you take your first shot, if you can remember to do that. I'll even do that on any kind of rifle I get. Just run something through the bore. Make sure there's not like a big chunk of something laying in there when you take your first shot. That's going to help you out. But for the break-in procedure, if you're really splitting hairs, it might help you just a little bit. So just trying to keep in perspective here before I take off. So, all right, our next video is going to get into the long-range precision rifle cleaning regime. And like we said earlier, we're talking about how we had two different break-in procedures based on different things that we're trying to accomplish. Your rifle cleaning regime is also going to be contingent upon numerous factors as well. So I'll try to get you set up and show you how to go ahead and set up an effective cleaning program for your particular rifle based on your environmental conditions and the basic character of your cartridge. Some cartridges that are real hot are going to, require different cleaning than a cartridge that's a lot more mild. So there's not like a one-size-fits-all cleaning regime. As you're probably getting used to by now, there's a lot of variables in there. But we'll get you set up and show you how to detect what you need to do. And before you know it, we'll be out there shooting and figuring out our firing solutions. We'll get you set up with ballistics tables as soon as we finish up on all our ballistics here. So we got a little bit more of internal ballistics to cover. Then we'll move on to transitional and external ballistics. And then before you know it, we'll be building our firing solution tables and our ballistics tables. So hang in there, guys. It's taking a little bit of time, but there's a lot of stuff to cover. We want to make sure we have a good solid foundation before we just jump into it all, so that we actually understand what's going on. That way you'll be able to do in-the-field problem solving, and you won't have to grope around blindly in the dark trying to figure stuff out if it goes wrong. So, all right, hang in there, and we'll get to the next video here hopefully shortly.
900.
Roger that.
Ready? Sit out. Green light.
Hit. Dead center. Roger that. Green light.